This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video I'd like to discuss how to get started in homeschooling. Before getting started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is William Michael. I studied classics and ancient history as well as educational philosophy at Rutgers University, and I was inducted into the university's chapter of Phi Beta Kappa in 2001. I'm the founding headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, which I founded in 2008. I have over 20 years of experience in private school teaching and administration. I also have over 20 years of experience in homeschooling. I have 10 homeschooled children of my own, ages 8 through 22. The oldest 3 of my children are currently in college with their tuition paid. I'm a lay Dominican in the Catholic Church, as is my wife. The advice that I'm going to share in this video is advice that's based on my 20-plus years of experience in teaching, school administration, and homeschooling. So I hope you find it practical and helpful. I've taken some time to reflect on what advice I would give to parents interested in getting started in homeschooling. And I came up with 10 steps that I believe are essential not only for getting started in homeschooling, but for being successful in homeschooling. For your convenience, I've listed these 10 steps here on the screen, and I'm going to show them again at the end of the video. What I'd like to do is walk through each of these 10 steps and discuss it in some detail so that you have some real useful, practical help in getting started in homeschooling. So let's go ahead and get started. The first step to get started in homeschooling is to know what it means to homeschool, to know what it means to homeschool. And that may seem obvious, but in my experience, I have found that in most homeschooling families, the parents really don't understand what it means to homeschool their children. Often, we'll hear parents complaining about modern schooling, complaining about public education, and so on, and they'll talk about keeping their kids home from school, keeping their kids out of school. And homeschooling is often presented as this radical idea of rebelling against modern schools and keeping the kids home. And that's not what homeschooling is. Homeschooling shouldn't have this rebellious, radical spirit behind it. The public schools and the private schools that exist in America were developed in the 1800s to provide educational opportunities for children who didn't have private education available to them. The public schools were not designed to provide education for children, but to provide education for children who didn't have access to education privately. It was always understood, all through history, it was understood that parents were responsible to educate their children, and normally private arrangements were made for children to be educated. Parents undertook the instruction of their children. They brought in the help of tutors and pedagogues to assist. Sometimes children might attend a school where some great schoolmaster was available for instruction. But no matter what families chose, it was always understood that the parents were responsible for the education of their children. In America, it's built into our legal system that parents retain this right to educate their own children. And therefore, homeschooling is not keeping kids home from school, but homeschooling is a legitimate and real form of schooling. So when we homeschool, we're not keeping our kids home from school or pulling our kids out of school. We're establishing our own private school for our own children. It's a real, legitimate school. Homeschooling is real schooling. It's simply conducted by the parents at home. And our government has always provided that parents may do so. What's also important to understand is once we realize that homeschooling is a legitimate form of schooling, it's logically necessary to understand that the parents are real school administrators. They're not simply parents keeping their kids home from school. They're parents who are choosing to act as the school administrators and teachers responsible for their children's education. Homeschooling parents have the same authority as school teachers and school principals, even superintendents. They have the power to determine what their children will study. They have the authority to decide how their children will study each subject. They keep their children's records. They assess the quality of their children's studies. They give their children high school diplomas. They prepare their children's transcripts, and so on. Homeschooling is a real and legitimate form of schooling, and parents are real school administrators. Once you understand that homeschooling is a real and legitimate form of private schooling, the second step that you need to take is to learn your state requirements for homeschooling. Learn your state requirements for homeschooling. Even though homeschooling is permitted throughout all of America, the requirements from state to state vary. Some states are very lenient towards homeschooling and hardly interact at all with homeschooling families. Other states have some stricter requirements in terms of subjects that need to be studied, accountability of homeschools with state supervisors and things like that. So you need to take time to learn your state requirements for homeschooling. It's important for you to remember that you are the legal administrator of your home school. Therefore, it's important for you to realize that you are responsible for operating your homeschool legally. I don't recommend that homeschool parents simply read what homeschool programs or homeschool organizations say about the requirements in different states, because these requirements sometimes change, and it doesn't matter that you heard this or that from this or that organization. What matters is that you, as a school administrator acting responsibly, learn your state requirements and comply with them. You will find, as a homeschooling parent, that if you are compliant with your state's requirements, you will usually receive nothing but respect and support from your state. So make the effort to learn your state requirements for homeschooling. To find your state requirements, simply go online and use a Google search to look for your state's homeschooling laws. Just type California homeschooling or something similar, and you'll see the results come up. And what I recommend is that you look for a result in those search results that is actually published on your state website, where you can get official state information on the requirements for homeschooling. Sometimes there are forms that need to be filled out. Sometimes there are very convenient videos or summaries or presentations, contact information, and so on. You'll want to find your state's information on the actual State Department of Education website, because there will be many useful resources for you on that site. If you need help finding your state requirements, I'd be happy to help you find the right page, so simply contact me if you have a hard time finding the location of your state requirements online. But this is the second step in getting started with homeschooling. Learn your state requirements for homeschooling. The third step in getting started in homeschooling is to register your homeschool in your state. Register your homeschool in your state. It's important for you to remember that in America, education is compulsory. That means that parents are legally required to provide for the education of their children during their school-age years. You cannot simply pull your children out of school and keep them home. That's not homeschooling. Remember that homeschooling is a real and legitimate form of private schooling, and states require that parents formally register their homeschools as private schools. So when you look up the requirements for your state, you'll likely find forms that need to be submitted to register your homeschool, and you need to make sure that you do this. Make sure that you register your homeschool in your state. That's what allows you to educate your children at home, because your children will be in school fulfilling the requirements of compulsory education laws. Step 3, register your homeschool in your state. After you've made the decision to homeschool and you've learned your state requirements and you've registered your homeschool in your state, it's time to really dig in to the work of organizing and preparing to operate your homeschool. Step 4 in getting started in homeschooling is to set goals for your homeschool. Set goals for your homeschool. And this is the most important step in not only getting started, but succeeding in homeschooling. You must set clear goals for your homeschool. Most homeschool families will talk about what they would like to achieve through homeschooling, but you will find that their goals are not clear, or their goals are not realistic. For example, a Catholic family may say something like, "We're homeschooling because we want to raise saints." That sounds very nice, but that's not a realistic goal for education. Saintliness is not the result of education. It requires grace, and therefore having a certain effect or producing a certain result like saintliness in our children's lives is not in our control. That's not an educational goal. An educational goal has to be a realistic goal, a goal that is within our own power, within our own control, a goal that we can work to fulfill. Most homeschool families do not set realistic goals, and this causes them to struggle throughout their years of homeschooling. The fourth step then is to set goals for your homeschool, realistic, attainable goals. So it's very important at this point for parents to come together, lay out a sheet of paper, and discuss what their goals are for educating their children, what the goals of their homeschool will be. If you can establish clear and realistic goals, these goals will direct all of the decisions that you're going to need to make in homeschooling, which we're going to discuss through the rest of this video. This step of setting goals for your homeschool is the key to success in homeschooling and will eliminate all of the confusion and anxiety that many homeschool families struggle with. Step 4, set goals for your homeschool. As you sit down to set goals for your homeschool, you're going to quickly learn that this isn't as easy as many people suggest it might be. It's easy to pull your kids out of school. It's easy to point out all of the faults of modern schools. It's easy to criticize the work of others. But when you choose to establish your own homeschool, you're responsible for everything that needs to be done. And you're going to find that this work of homeschooling is serious business that requires great prudence. And prudence comes through experience. And homeschooling parents normally do not have experience homeschooling. They may have no experience in education. They may have no experience in teaching. They may not know about available resources and methods used in homeschooling. And homeschooling parents often lack prudence when they get started. And so it's very important to identify some experienced advisors to help. Now, what kind of help do you need? You cannot be lazy and simply hand over the decision-making to someone else and do what someone else tells you to do. When you decide to establish a homeschool, you are responsible to educate your children according to your convictions. You have to make those decisions. And those decisions are not what you ought to seek help with. Those are decisions for you to make freely for your own homeschool. The kind of help that you need is practical. It's experiential advice and help from other homeschooling parents who have succeeded in homeschooling. Parents that you can look at and see that they know what they're doing. They've already raised their children. They've successfully educated them at home. They've already been through all the legal requirements. They know how it works. They've been through college admissions. They've had adult students move on and off into college and careers. They have experience, practical experience in homeschooling that's invaluable to you as a new homeschooling parent. So we're not talking about asking other people what you should do in terms of goals. That's your responsibility. But when you get into the practical details of homeschooling, the experience of other homeschooling parents is invaluable, and you should work to seek out and identify some experienced, trustworthy advisors to help you. That's step number 5. After you've begun to establish the goals of your homeschool, you'll find that you're doing a lot of talking about long-term goals, long-term results, and so on. And while those goals and those long-term discussions are necessary, you're going to have to move from long-term talk to short-term talk. You're going to have to move from talking about goals, which are far off in the distance and easy to talk about, to objectives or intermediate steps that need to be completed to move from where you are to the fulfillment of those goals. So in step number 6, you're going to need to lay out objectives to achieve your homeschool goals. Lay out objectives to achieve your homeschool goals. And remember, this word objectives means intermediate steps that need to be achieved in order to reach your long-term goal. Lay out objectives to achieve your homeschool goals. The most important thing to think about in laying out objectives is how your goals are to be pursued in time. So for example, if you have a 6-year-old child and you're talking about the goals for the education of a 6-year-old child, it's reasonable to expect that that child will be home until he's 18 years old for homeschooling. So you have from age 6 to 18 to achieve those goals at age 18. So you've got a 12-year plan to lay out and steps along the way that you can focus on and aim at as you go, because talking about the long-term goal is not going to be helpful today to get started with your homeschool activities. So the main focus of objectives is to bring those goals down into time and lay them out in terms of how much time you have available. You may be starting with an older child where the child is 14 years old and you only have, let's say, 4 years to achieve your goals. So your objectives need to be based on 4 years of homeschooling rather than 12 years of homeschooling. So we need to bring the goals down into time-based intermediate steps that we're going to take to pursue those goals. Now, when I work with homeschooling families, just to give you some simple advice to get started, I tell parents to divide homeschooling into 2 important periods. The first important period is the 4 years of high school. Those 4 years of high school studies need to go on a transcript. And so 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, those 4 years of study are very important, and they need to be considered as one division of time in your child's years of homeschooling. The other years before high school are separate. Those years before high school begins are simply used to prepare to put the child in the best possible position when he or she begins those 4 high school years. So a simple division of time to get started, a simple way to organize objectives is to look at the years that you have for homeschooling and to divide them into 2 parts, the high school years and the years preparing for high school. So that's a simple example of how you can set some objectives based on time. And then from there, you would need to break it down further into objectives for each year of your homeschooling. And if you're diligent in this, you can continue down to each month and so on. But there's a need to move from goals down to objectives. Now you can imagine how helpful these objectives will be, but these objectives will be impossible to lay out if you haven't set clear goals. And that's why earlier I said the step where we set goals for our homeschool is the most important step in succeeding in homeschooling. Here in step 6, you move to lay out objectives to achieve those homeschool goals. After you've established the goals for your homeschool and you've begun to lay out the objectives for your homeschooling, you'll be able to move on to step 7 here, which is to establish a regular homeschool schedule. Establish a regular homeschool schedule. One of the greatest benefits of homeschooling is that you have the entire calendar year for studies and your schedule can be flexible. You have the entire calendar year for studies and your calendar can be flexible. Modern schools work under an artificial time crunch because there are only 180 school days each year. That's less than half the days of the calendar year. When you move to homeschool, that time crunch pressure of the school schedule goes away. You have the whole year to pursue your homeschool goals. You have the whole year to work through your homeschool objectives. You not only have the whole year, but as I said, it's flexible. So your family has flexibility. You can take off when your family needs to take off. You can take a vacation when dad has vacation time from work, even if that's in the middle of March. One of the best benefits, the most important benefits of homeschooling is the flexibility that allows your family to enjoy a high quality of life with everyone involved, because the homeschool can adapt to the schedule of each member of the family. Even if we think negatively, if there are illnesses or pregnancies or troubles that arise, the homeschool schedule is flexible and can absorb those difficulties, and they become much less influential than they would be in the lives of families enrolled in schools where the scheduling is so strict. We want to always maintain this flexibility because it's one of the greatest benefits of homeschooling. At the same time, a lack of discipline is one of the greatest evils of homeschooling. I said before, it's easy to criticize schools and point out all their faults, but there's one benefit of schooling that we all usually take for granted, and it's the order and discipline of the modern school system. The modern schools have very strict schedules. There's bells ringing at the beginning and ending of every class. There are specific amounts of time to move from one class to the next, from one activity to the next, and so on. And that structure and order of the school day is very helpful for getting things done. When you bring your children home and establish your homeschool, all of that order and discipline and structure goes away. And it's for you to establish the regular homeschool schedule. And this is a very difficult challenge. So we have two things going on here. We have the benefit of flexibility in homeschool scheduling, but we also have the difficulty of establishing a regular homeschool schedule. The people who need the homeschool schedule the most are your children. Your children need a regular homeschool schedule. They need to wake up in the morning and know what's going on for the day. They need to know what the default schedule is for the day. And a routine, if you think about routine as a person in the house with you, routine is one of your greatest helpers in homeschooling. It takes a great deal of work to establish a regular homeschool schedule, but when you do so, the children will get used to that schedule and they'll begin to operate within it. And as I said, routine, if you think of it as a person, will be one of your greatest assistants in homeschooling. So you need to work to establish a regular homeschool schedule. And this schedule should be built around your family's necessary activities. So if there's a family business that needs to be run, the homeschool schedule can be designed to work around that schedule. This is one of the great benefits of homeschooling. But it's going to take some time for you to work to establish a regular homeschool schedule. And if you don't establish a regular homeschool schedule, you're going to find that homeschooling is chaotic and unproductive. You may think that it's difficult to discipline yourself as a parent to maintain a homeschool schedule, but what you'll find, and this is one word of advice based on experience, you'll find that the consequences of not having a regular homeschool schedule are infinitely worse than the difficulties of establishing and keeping a regular homeschool schedule. So step 7, after you've laid out your goals, after you've laid out your objectives, is to establish a regular homeschool schedule. By this point, you should be able to begin to imagine what this homeschool experience will look and feel like. You've already learned about the state requirements. You've already registered your homeschool. You've already laid out goals for your homeschool. You've laid out objectives to help you achieve those goals over time. And you've established a regular homeschool schedule. With all of that in place, it's now time to consider what study materials, what resources you'll need to actually work to fulfill those objectives. Step 8 is to purchase or obtain by whatever means study materials that serve your homeschool objectives. To purchase study materials that serve your homeschool objectives. Now, as soon as you get into homeschooling, you're going to learn that there's no end to the publishing and selling of homeschool materials. It is a massive industry. It is a massive market of books and resources and videos and services, and they go on infinitely. And you will very quickly be inundated with catalogs and websites and resources and books and products. It will be overwhelming, and there's no way for anyone to make prudent decisions about what study materials or resources or services to use unless they've already established their goals for their homeschool. They've already laid out the objectives for their homeschool, and they've already established a regular homeschool schedule. So they have an idea of how much time there is for different activities. With those things in place, if you then enter into the consideration of what study materials you should use, how you should go about conducting your children's studies, you'll have guidance from your goals and objectives and your schedule to make this decision-making process very simple. You'll be able to eliminate many different options because they are simply not able to fit within your schedule, or that they simply don't serve your objectives and goals. And you need to be very strict in this. Once you establish your goals and objectives and can see the regular schedule that will be in place for your homeschool, you need to allow those prior steps to guide your decisions in this step. And purchase study materials not that are well marketed or that are attractive or that look fancy or that are affordable necessarily, but to purchase study materials that serve your homeschool objectives. If you do not purchase study materials that serve your homeschool objectives, you will end up getting lost in those study materials, wandering from your objectives and not fulfilling your goals. And this is what I would say most homeschool families do. They end up following the study materials rather than pursuing their goals and prudently choosing the study materials that best serve their homeschool goals. Be very careful to observe this step. Purchase study materials that serve your homeschool objectives. Step 9 is to determine how you will maintain student records. Determine how you will maintain student records. If you attended a modern school, think back to how much time and effort the schools took to maintain student records. They maintained attendance records, health records, individual class records, quarterly grades, yearly grades, transcripts, on and on and on. Modern schools are very good at maintaining student records. When you choose to homeschool, it's your responsibility as the school administrator to maintain all student records, and this can be a real challenge. First of all, your state requirements are likely going to identify some records that you need to keep to fulfill those state requirements. So that's going to be the first priority. These often include attendance records because you normally have to agree to have at least as many days of school as the modern schools have. And you may be asked to show some sort of attendance record for days that you actually conduct homeschool activity. So some of the records will be determined by the state requirements, but you're going to have to keep other records as well, records that show your children's progress or keep track of your children's progress. This can be very difficult, and I think that if you're not assisted by some sort of learning management system, that's abbreviated LMS. If you're not assisted by some sort of learning management system, keeping records is going to get out of hand, especially if you have a number of children. So as you consider your goals and your objectives and your schedule and your study materials, you also need to take time to think about how you're going to keep student records. It's going to be necessary to have a file cabinet with file folders and dividers for the individual children and their subjects to keep samples of their work as a portfolio of things they've achieved. But student records are a challenge that most homeschool families don't have an answer for. If you enroll in a study program that has online studies, and this is to be considered also when you think about the study materials that you're going to use, you should consider as one of the deciding factors when you choose study materials how the program you choose will assist you in maintaining student records. This can be a real challenge. Many parents are very anxious about student records. They don't necessarily know what to keep or how much to keep and so on. But I would advise you to keep as many records of your students' achievement and progress as possible, because if there's ever any question of whether you're leading your children to sufficient progress to satisfy state requirements, you'll want as much evidence as possible. And you'll also want evidence to provide backup evidence in case questions are asked about attendance or something like that, and maybe you forgot to keep the attendance recorded on a chart. Well, if your children are active in an online study program, their activity will be recorded and can be demonstrated. So These are more things to think about as you make your final decisions with reference to study materials, programs that you may use, and so on. You've got to consider, very importantly, how you will maintain student records. By this point, it's time to get to work. You've already laid out the goals. You've already identified the objectives. You've already obtained study materials or enrolled in study programs to provide the lesson content and record keeping. You've already determined how you're going to maintain records for your students' work. Once all of this preparatory work is finished, it's time to actually execute your homeschool plan, to actually put that plan into action and execute it. The more carefully you work through those previous steps, and remember, I recommend that you find trustworthy, experienced advisors to help with that planning part of homeschooling. Once you get your plan laid out, if it's a well thought out plan for homeschooling, it's time to dig your heels in and execute that homeschool plan. Normally, this is the responsibility of a homeschooling mother. She's home with the children throughout the day, and the homeschooling father needs to make sure that he has provided his wife, the homeschooling mother, with all of the help setting the goals, discussing the objectives, developing the homeschool schedule, choosing the best and most appropriate study materials for the homeschool. He has to make sure that he does everything in his power to put his wife, the homeschooling mother, in position to effectively and as conveniently as possible execute the homeschool plan. And this takes a great deal of sacrifice from the father. He has to subject himself to the homeschool schedule, even though the homeschool schedule, if well designed, would be designed around his schedule as well. There are times where he needs to subject himself to the homeschool schedule for the sake of the family. He can find ways that he can participate in the work of homeschooling, but normally the bulk of the homeschool work is going to be handled by the homeschooling mother. And she's going to need to execute the homeschool plan day by day as consistently as possible, because the way that real progress is made in study is by moving forward little by little, bit by bit, day by day, over many, many days of consistent execution of the homeschool plan. This is where the plan either succeeds or fails in the execution of that plan. No matter how good the plan may be, the execution will determine whether the homeschool succeeds. At the same time, if in the execution of the homeschool plan, the parents begin to gain experience and see corrections and improvements that need to be made, the parents should be careful to make those changes at appropriate times. Once decisions are made, let's say for a term of study, let's say from September until Christmas, parents should try to keep things the same, even if it's difficult, until the end of a study term, and then make changes, or until the end of the school year, and then make changes, because changes that are made will always have a negative effect on the children who, remember, benefit from a regular school schedule at home. So homeschooling parents need to be careful to resist the temptation to make changes every time something doesn't work out well. Remember that the changing is a problem that has negative effects. Constant changes can negatively affect student morale, and students will grow frustrated and weary with changes, especially when changes mean undoing work that's been done, starting over all over again, losing work that was completed, and so on. Be very careful that you make changes at appropriate times when the children are least inconvenienced by those changes. So execute that homeschool plan. Take notes, journal, pay attention to the details of the execution of that plan. Make adjustments to that plan as you gain experience, but be careful to make changes at proper times. And don't make changes that are unnecessary. Even if there are benefits to gain by those changes, remember that changes always bring some negatives, and they need to be allowed to weigh against the positives that you have in mind. The more effort you put into setting goals, the more effort you put into laying out objectives, the more effort you put into getting advice from experienced homeschool parents before you get started, the more successfully and prudently you select study materials and establish a responsible and flexible and sustainable homeschool schedule, the more easily you'll be able to execute your homeschool plan and minimize changes, which always have a negative effect to some degree. So step 10, having established your homeschool plan, put it into action and consistently, regularly execute that homeschool plan. This is the last and lasting step in getting started in homeschooling. By this point in the video, I hope that you have a sense that homeschooling is an overwhelming challenge. Homeschooling in this generation is a heroic undertaking. I would argue that it's humanly impossible. It's therefore necessary for us to realize that we have to rely on God's grace to help us to fulfill this challenge. It's a noble challenge. It's a virtuous challenge. It's a necessary challenge. And it requires heroic work. But I believe that the steps that I've provided will give you everything that you need to get off to a successful start in homeschooling. I hope that you can sense where your weaknesses currently lie. I hope that you can sense where you need help. I hope that you can sense what you need to figure out, what questions you need to get answered, and so on. That's the purpose of this video. I want you to succeed in homeschooling, and as an experienced homeschooling father, I know how difficult it is. And I am offering this advice to you, wishing that I had received this advice when I was 25 years old and getting started as a homeschooling parent. To review, we've discussed 10 steps to get started in homeschooling. First, to know what it means to homeschool. Second, to learn your state requirements for homeschooling. Third, to register your homeschool in your state. Fourth, to set goals for your homeschool. Fifth, to identify some experienced advisors to help. Sixth, to lay out objectives to achieve your homeschool goals. Seventh, to establish a regular homeschool schedule. Eighth, to purchase study materials that serve your homeschool objectives. Ninth, to determine how you will maintain student records. And 10th, to execute your homeschool plan. These are the 10 steps to get started in homeschooling. If you're interested in providing your children with a classical Catholic education, we can help. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy provides a complete system of support, study materials, assessments, record keeping, and more for homeschooling families. If you'd like to learn more about our program, visit us online at classicalliberarts.com. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to discuss, feel free to email me at mail@classicalliberarts.com or contact me by phone at 980-699-5575. In this video, we've discussed how to get started in homeschooling. I hope that you found this video helpful, and I encourage you to get in touch if there's anything that I can do to help you not only get started but succeed in homeschooling. Again, my name is William Michael. I'm the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. May God bless your studies.